And welcome back to Coast. David Seaman, independent journalist, has been advocating for civil liberties, rollback of unconstitutional surveillance measures. David hosts a very popular podcast on iTunes. He's been a regular guest here on Coast to Coast. Now, if I were to tell you that the NSA, the National Security Agency, spent $250 million a year to try to bend the arm of U.S. tech companies so they would produce less secure products so that the NSA could spy on you, what would you say about that? David, another unbelievable story.
Pretty unbelievable, but it has been confirmed. That's in The Guardian. And thanks for having me back on again tonight. Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable that a taxpayer-funded agency is spending $250 million a year of what amounts to our hard-earned money to make U.S. tech companies create products and services that are actually less safe for customers.
Now, did these companies, David, take the bait? Did they take the money?
I believe that a lot of the big U.S. tech companies are forced to comply with whatever the NSA tells them to do. When you had the CEO of Yahoo recently, she was asked about the extent of their cooperation with the NSA, and she said, look, if we didn't cooperate, it would have been treason. And that's pretty insane when, sharing the intimate private communications of American citizens who aren't doing anything wrong, just people trying to go about their business and talk to their families over email, that to fail to cooperate with an agency that wants to spy on them is tantamount to treason.
Now, financially strapped BlackBerry, which is going to be sold, they didn't play ball, though, did they?
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons why BlackBerry did not succeed over the last few years, and one of them is that their apps are not as competitive. But it does raise an interesting question because it seems like the NSA, which we know is one of the largest employers of mathematicians in the world and has an absolutely massive budget, that behind the scenes they're doing quite a bit to decide they might be doing quite a bit to decide who's a winner and a loser within the marketplace. This is an agency that operates with almost no real oversight,
Was there any agency, was there any group, was there any specific person immune from this surveillance?
I don't believe so, George. I was actually talking to my dad the other day. I had a video about the latest NSA stuff that was in the New York Times. I did a video that summed it all up in 2 minutes, and it went kind of viral on YouTube. And I was talking to my dad on the phone, and I was like, man, now they're really going to be focusing in on me if they weren't before. And he was like, Dave, what are they going to do to you? I mean, what's the worst they can do? Spy on your emails and phone calls? That's what they're doing to everybody. The recent disclosure in The Guardian is that they're keeping vast amounts of data on millions of Internet users and keeping it for up to a year. And these are people who aren't even specifically targeted by the NSA. These are people who are not suspected of any crime. They're just people, just innocent Americans and innocent people around the world.
What if you were playing around with emails, sending messages back and forth to someone, and maybe you found out somebody stole something or robbed a bank or something like that? Could they use that information without a warrant? Just simply grab it and use it?
Yeah, unfortunately they could. There's something that came out called parallel construction, where what the NSA was doing was giving some of its data to other law enforcement agencies, including the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. And since they couldn't, you can't use that kind of evidence in a courtroom because it's top secret evidence, and they also didn't want to, confirm the existence of this program. So they would do something called parallel construction, where they look in to the communications that the NSA has snooped on, but then they have to come up with some plausible reason why they caught you. So if you're at an intersection at 7 p.m., a cop might pull you over for a broken taillight, and that's the official reason why you were pulled over. And then, oh, wait, we found some marijuana in your car. Now you're going to jail. And they don't tell you that the reason why you were pulled over in the first place is because the NSA said, based on this guy's emails and GPS data, he will be in this location at this time, and he might be transporting some drugs. And this all sounds crazy, but this is actually what these programs are doing. And even the New York Times piece, it was the top story in yesterday's print version of the New York Times. You could not miss it. I saw a guy at Starbucks just staring at the headline for a couple minutes yesterday. And, couldn't miss it, but a lot of people don't seem to actually understand what the article said. They think that the NSA is just looking at the stuff that you post on Facebook and Twitter, and they go, oh, well, you should know better than to post your stuff on a website like that anyway. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's not all the article said. It also said that they're taking material from, this is an exact quote from the New York Times, from public, commercial, and other sources, including bank codes, insurance information, Facebook profiles, passenger manifests, voter registration rolls, and GPS location information, as well as property records and unspecified tax data. So what somebody was joking about on Twitter, George, someone said, if you don't want the NSA to spy on you, just don't use the internet, don't go outside, don't travel, don't own any property, don't pay taxes. Yeah, don't pay taxes and you should be fine.
Unbelievable.
Pretty absurd.
How petty does something have to be before they even watch it?
Well, I mean, in this case, they're watching millions of people with no probable cause, none whatsoever, from what I can see in the two pieces that have come out. And it's really disturbing because they can store this information, and then at some point in the future, if you become a problem to some congressman or to some large corporation that is well connected, who's to say they can't just go back through this stuff, pick out a couple of emails you sent to your ex-girlfriend when you were drunk, take it out of context and use that to start some kind of investigation against you or to attack your character. It's absolutely scary stuff, and a lot of people have been comparing it to what the Stasi did in East Germany with their surveillance techniques. And I don't think that's a fair comparison at this point, because what we're doing is far more advanced and far more scary than what their technology was capable of.
This has been going on, though, David, for how long now?
Oh, I mean, in some form for a long time. Like, there was a story that came out recently that the NSA back in the 70s was spying on prominent anti-war people, a couple of senators, as well as Martin Luther King Jr. So, this kind of stuff has been going on for a while. But what's really troubling is that this new program, the one that takes in your voter registration rolls and GPS location data and all this other stuff, that started up in 2010. So that's under Obama's watch. And, there are a lot of people out there who go, some of this stuff was started up during the Bush era as a response to 9/11, and maybe Obama hasn't had enough time to turn some of this stuff around and fix it. But that's just not accurate. Like, a lot of these programs have either started or accelerated under President Obama. So you have a situation where what he is saying in public and what his officials are saying in public are simply not true. He went on the Tonight Show and told Jay Leno, quote, "We don't have a domestic spying program. And unless the New York Times is willing to lie on the front page of their newspaper, unless the Guardian is making all of this stuff up, then we have a real discrepancy between what the President of the United States telling us and what is actually happening with our money."
And why would they be after Edward Snowden if we didn't have a program?
Oh, yeah, that's the biggest. I think that's a great point. That's one of the biggest absurdities of all is, we're not going to spend much time on Edward Snowden. Well, you keep attacking him. You keep trying to get him. You're intimidating the journalists covering him. Clearly, this is something that strikes at the heart of whatever has been happening in America post 9/11. I think the more we find out, the less satisfied people are with it. And that sense of powerlessness has really gone away. I think at first, when this stuff came out, people were just scared and they didn't know what to make of it. But now that we have more information and there's been a lot of public discussion, thanks to shows like yours and a couple of others, people are not afraid anymore. People want this to end. It's absolutely ridiculous. There are so many better things we could be spending our money on. This is one of those things where there are 100 potential downsides and almost no upside. If this is being used to stop terror attacks, why didn't they stop the Boston attack? Why weren't they able to stop the Sandy Hook shootings or the Fort Hood shootings? It's totally ridiculous,
That's true. They seem to be picking and choosing. But there's also a bigger picture here, David. There's a picture here of some kind of massive paranoia by these agencies, by government. There's something wrong here. I can't put my finger on it. How about you?
Oh, I get the same gut feeling, and it goes beyond the gut feeling. In general, I don't think that governments are irrational. I think that, sometimes they're amoral or immoral, whatever you want to call it. I don't think they act irrationally. And you see the amount of money being spent on domestic surveillance, being spent on drone research, and even bullet purchases for domestic agencies like the Department of Homeland Security has put in some disturbing orders. Every one of these things on its own, you're like, oh, well, it could just be a case of government waste and bureaucracy gone wrong. But put together, it really does make you wonder what's around the corner. Is there going to be, these are just my guess, is a dollar collapse? Are they preparing for big protests? Because one of the things that people have pointed out is that the kind of spying the NSA is doing since 2010 is great at finding the, quote, social connections that can identify associates, your locations at certain times, your traveling companions, and other personal information. That's a quote from the New York Times. And so if you're using technology that's designed to figure out who you're interacting with, not only online, but when you're offline, and who you're traveling with, that's a great way to shut down any budding protest against, Obama or whoever takes his place afterward. Just an absolutely great way to pick out the 10 or 15 people in every city who are organizing protests, make those people disappear with trumped-up charges or whatever you need to do. And, it's brilliant in a way, because this is the recipe for shutting down any kind of dissent or free speech in
Well, it is brilliant, but it's something that, the Russians, for example, have done for years. We'll be back in a moment with you, David, and we'll take some phone calls on Coast to Coast AM. David Seaman with us. We'll take your calls. We're talking about the NSA and the things that they do. The other thing I was thinking too, David, is either they're so paranoid about massive terrorist activities, or it's totally the opposite, and they're trying to spy on everybody. What do you think?
Yes, George, I think that's a good point. I mean, if you were to take away the fact that the U.S. government is doing this and that we all, feel a sense of, we don't want to criticize our own government necessarily. We like to think that we're the good guys and that we stand for these values of freedom still. But if you were to take away the fact that it's the U.S. government doing this and just say some government, government X overseas is now spending billions of dollars to spy on its own people's emails and phone calls and their locations using GPS, as well as, their voting rolls, their voting registrations, what would you say about that country, right? What would you say? I'm asking you, what do you think could be the reason for this?
I think it's a paranoid thing. I think 9/11 created the paranoia, and then they really went wild with it. And they haven't stopped. And now as technology continues to get better and better and better, they're using it every way they can. I think they go up in a room and they go, let's see if we can get information on all these people. How about the judges? Let's try them next. And I think they're playing around with this technology.
Yeah, I think you're pretty close to the mark there. I mean, clearly this started after 9/11 under Bush, and it was because people said, you do whatever you have to do to make sure this never happens again. But now we're more than a decade out from 9/11, and you really have to wonder, if they're sharing this information with domestic law enforcement agencies like the DEA, if they're using it to track people who have no connection to terrorism, then it could just be that the power became too addicting, and they went, oh, look at this. We can figure out who every single activist is. We can peer into what journalists are up to, make sure they're not about to cover any kind of explosive stuff. Like you said, we can get dirt on a Supreme Court justice or on, some prominent judge, make sure that things stay in our court. It's a really slippery slope, and I think we're starting to slide down that slope right now. I know a lot of Americans are not happy about this. It's getting kind of ignored by, the cable networks. You're not hearing all that much talk about it on Fox or MSNBC. But if you go online, people are super heated about this topic. And certainly, some of the newspapers out there are covering it pretty well. So it's something that needs to be addressed. And Obama has basically doubled down on his support of this agency, which to me is really perplexing.
Most people will say, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't have to worry about anything. But that's not the issue, David, is it?
No, it's not the issue. I mean, we have a Constitution and a Bill of Rights so that we never have to say things like that. I mean, if you're not doing anything wrong and you have nothing to hide, then why is the government looking at you in the first place? And just the existence of these programs and the knowledge of this stuff, it affects your ability to speak freely, because you can't really email your friends or family and say what you really think about the government or what you really think about, your congressman or your senator in your state. How can you say these things knowing that it could be stored for years and then look back on. That's not really the American way, and it's something that this is the kind of stuff that we used to make fun of the Soviet Union for doing, this level of, kind of domestic surveillance. And now we're the ones doing it, and there's no Soviet Union. And there's really, I think, in a sense, there's no superpower to tell us that we're doing something wrong,
Let's take some calls here for you, David. We'll pick it up by going to Tom in Memphis, Tennessee, to get things started east of the Rockies. Tom, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I'm a proud veteran. I'm an honorably discharged member of the U.S. Army.
Thank you, sir, for serving.
And I appreciate you, George Noori, for serving our country also.
Thank you.
I love my country to death. I'm just not so sure how I feel about my government. I mean, there's nothing more to me than my country. It means a whole lot. But, you look at it this way. If they're getting back doors to come into our computers and emails and everything, what's not to say that they can't plant something in there? I mean, seriously, I'm not being paranoid. I'm just being realistic here. I mean, it worries me that they've got that much power to do whatever they want to do.
You're absolutely right. It's not the country, it's the government. I mean, I still believe, always will, that this is the best country on the planet. When I escaped a botched kidnapping attempt in Mexico a year and a half ago, there was nothing like coming back to the good old USA, David. There's nothing.
Oh, yeah, there's nothing like a hot shower and, real TV. And the American people are great. It's not the people that are the problem. And it's not the land or, the amount of innovation and anything else here. The problem is some very creepy policies have been enacted in D.C. over the last few years.
Yes.
And this stuff is accelerating. It really is accelerating. Like, it's always been bad. Yes, it happened in the 70s. It's getting worse because the technology is better and there's less oversight and there's plenty of money for it. It seems like it's really hard to start a business in America today unless you happen to be involved in defense or surveillance, and then hundreds of millions of dollars just come your way. And it's a huge industry, and it shouldn't be. Spying on your fellow citizens should not be a huge industry. It should be a shameful activity.
It's become a government of paranoia, hasn't it?
It has. It's a very paranoid government. Just go to the airport. See the tone there is really quite paranoid. I think we're living in a transitional time where if enough of us say, no, this is unacceptable, then things will get better. And again, as I said earlier, that sense of being powerless is really going away because people online are talking about this. I'm sure your show, every night you talk about this, you probably get a ton of people calling in like they're doing right now. And people are not afraid to speak up. And you had Lawrence Lessig,
yes,
which is a prominent law professor at Harvard. And just recently, he said that Congress at this point has become so dysfunctional and so corrupt that we might need to convene an Article 5 convention, which is allowed by the Constitution. We might need to convene one of these Article 5 conventions to basically clean some of these people out and reorganize things. Because some of the people in Congress, not just some, a lot of them strongly support this NSA stuff. And you have Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is supposedly a liberal California Democrat, whatever that means. And she is also not only supporting the NSA spying on Americans, but she's sitting there on camera in public, there on the floor, and she's saying, well, you're only a journalist if you're a journalist who's receiving a paycheck from a corporation. And if you're one of those people, then sure, you should be protected by the First Amendment. That is not what the Bill of Rights says. It doesn't say that you get free speech protections as long as you get a paycheck from NBC or Fox. It says that all of us get that, and it doesn't define who a journalist is.
Gary is in Santa Maria.